In the 1970s, Fort Worth, Texas, also known as the City of the Artisan Wells, was considered a big city with a small town feel. You could pass a complete stranger on the street and they would smile and say hello as if they had known you for years. It was a community where everyone felt safe. Unbeknownst to the residents of Fort Worth, there was a lot of crime happening right under their noses. In that time, news didn't travel like it does today. There weren't the internet or Facebook groups where people could learn about these crimes. So between 1972 and 1975, the abundance of missing and murdered women in the area was going unnoticed. However, in 1974, when three young girls seemed to vanish during a shopping trip to the mall, people started paying attention. This is the story of Rachel, Renee, and Julie, also known as the Fort Worth Trio. Who were these three girls? Let's start with Rachel. Mary Rachel Trelica, maiden name Arnold, went by her middle name of Rachel. She was a 19-year-old girl who grew up in Fort Worth. She had an older sister, Deborah, and a younger brother, Rusty. Rachel's father, Raymond Cotton Arnold, was an abusive father to his two daughters. So when Rachel turned 17 and was a senior in high school, she got married to her boyfriend, Thomas Trelica. Most people called him Tommy. They had been married for 6 months at the time of her disappearance. Right after getting married, Rachel's dad, Cotton, sold his transmission shop to Tommy for $10,000. Her dad had stage 4 terminal cancer, so he could no longer do the job. This gave Rachel and Tommy a steady source of income so they wouldn't have to struggle like a lot of young married couples do. They lived in a little house in Fort Worth along with their roommate. This roommate just happened to be Rachel's sister, Deborah. She had been living with her boyfriend at the time, but had been fighting with him, so Rachel told her she could stay with her and Tommy as long as she needed to. Rachel attended Southwest High School along with her best friend, Lisa Renee Wilson. Lisa Renee Wilson, who also went by her middle name of Renee, was 14 years old at the time of the disappearance. Rachel had lived near Renee before she got married and still lived at home with her family. Their parents were also close. They always went hunting and fishing together. On the morning of the 23rd of December, Rachel had asked her sister Deborah to go to the mall with her. Rachel had just found out that her stepson, Tommy's 2-year-old son, Sean, from his previous marriage, was going to be spending Christmas with them. She had already gotten him one present, but if he was going to be there Christmas morning, she wanted to make sure he woke up to a lot of presents underneath the tree. Deborah told Rachel she was too tired to go to the mall. Her, Rachel, and Tommy had been up until 4 a.m. that morning playing cards, so she wanted to sleep in for a little while longer. So Rachel called Renee to see if she wanted to go. Renee was at her grandma's house where she stayed almost every weekend while her mom worked at the local dry cleaners. That morning, she was hanging out with her boyfriend, Terry Mosley, and his 9-year-old sister, Julie. They lived right across the street from her grandma's house. They had exchanged Christmas gifts early, and Renee was thrilled that Terry had gotten her a promise ring. Renee told Rachel she would go to the mall with her. She actually wanted to stop at the Army surplus store and pick up her new jeans that she had in layaway. She asked Terry if he wanted to join them, but he had other plans. One of his friends was in the hospital having an operation, and Terry was supposed to spend the day with him. He didn't want to be rude and ditch his friend. He did, however, remind Renee that they had a Christmas party to go to that evening. She wasn't going to miss that party. She couldn't wait to show off her ring to all of her friends. Little Julie Mosley, Terry's sister, had been listening to the older kids talk, and she decided she wanted to go to the mall with Rachel and Renee. They didn't mind taking her with them, but they told her she had to get permission from her mom first. Rayanne Mosley was a single mom of 3 kids. There was 16-year-old Terry, 11-year-old Janet, and 9-year-old Julie. She was recently separated from her husband and was trying to learn to balance working and being a mom by herself. When Julie called her that day, Rayanne at first didn't want her to go. She said, quote, "I remember Julie calling and wanting to go to South Seminary. I said, no, you don't have money. You just stay home. I knew Renee and her mother, but I didn't really know Rachel. She kept whining about how she wouldn't have anyone to play with. I finally gave in, but I told her to be home by 6 p.m. End quote. The girls said it would be no problem being home by 6. They were planning to be home by 4 because Renee wanted to get ready for the Christmas party that night. At 12 p.m., Rachel pulled up in her 1972 Oldsmobile 98. The girls piled in the car and took off. They had no clue that they would never come home again. The first stop they made was the surplus store. Renee went inside and purchased the blue jeans that she had in layaway. While she was there, she changed out of the jeans she had on and put on one of the new pairs. Then they headed to the mall. At that time, it was called Seminary South Shopping Center. Today, it is known as La Grande Plaza. Then they vanished into thin air. Several witnesses say they remember seeing the girls at the mall. Renee had on a shirt that stuck out to people, but there has been 2 different versions of what that shirt was. Some witnesses say it was a yellow t-shirt that said "Sweet Honesty" across the front of it in green letters. And others say it was a white pullover sweatshirt with green letters. As we know from other cases, eyewitness sightings are not reliable. So did they even make it inside the mall at all? When the girls weren't home by 4 or 5, their parents started getting worried. They decided to go look for the girls. Rachel's mom arrived at the mall first, before the other parents. She found Rachel's car in the upper parking lot of the Sears store. It was locked. Rachel's little brother Rusty, who was 11 at the time, remembers going into the mall and to every store. They had the girls paged and talked to several employees. They did this for hours until the lights were going out, signaling that the mall was closing. They finally left the mall around 11 p.m. At that time, Rusty remembers not being too concerned. He was used to having a rebellious sister that broke the rules. This wasn't Rachel, though. It was his sister, Deborah. He said she would run away a lot until one day she didn't come home, and neither did Rachel. They both moved out and in with their boyfriends. The parents called the Fort Worth Police Department that night and reported the girls missing. They met them at the mall and checked over the car, but nothing seemed suspicious. They went and got Tommy and had him come to the mall and look at the car to see if he noticed anything that wasn't normal. He said there were some documents missing from the glove box. 3 $50 bonds he had purchased with his ex-wife, and a copy of his parents' will. They had both passed away recently. But in the next sentence, he said he might have removed them from the car himself, so who knows? No one heard from any of the girls that night. As the hours ticked by, the parents got more and more worried. The 3 fathers of the missing girls stayed in the mall parking lot all night that night. They waited next to Rachel's car. They wanted to be there in case the girls came back or if someone else came back for the car. But nothing happened. There was no sign of their girls or anyone else. The next day, something strange happened. Tommy went out and checked his mailbox, and there was a letter in it, and it said it was from Rachel. I will post a copy of this letter on the Victim's Voice Facebook page. It read, quote, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears' upper lot. Love, Rachel." The police had already believed that the girls had just taken off, and this letter just helped solidify that in their minds. The parents, however, knew the girls had not just run away. Renee had just gotten a promise ring from her boyfriend and was ready to show it off at the Christmas party. She would have never missed that. And 9-year-old Julie would never be okay being away from her family on Christmas. Like Terry Mosley stated, Renee had wanted him to go to the mall with them. Wouldn't he have known if there was a plan for him to run away? The parents also didn't believe it was Rachel that wrote the letter that Tommy found in the mailbox. There were a few things that were found to be strange in this letter. 1. The writing on the envelope was done in pencil, while the letter was done in pen. 2. The last few numbers on the postmarked zip code had somehow been blurred out. Police thought it had either come from Throckmorton, which was 125 miles from Fort Worth, or Weatherford, which was 30 miles east from Fort Worth. 3. The L at the end of Rachel's name had originally been written to look like an E. Whoever wrote it wrote the L over to correct it. 4. The letter was addressed to Thomas. Rachel never called him Thomas. She always called him Tommy. And 5. The letter almost had to be hand-delivered. It was there the next morning after they went missing. The mail doesn't go that fast even nowadays, and back then it was slower. The letter was sent to the FBI lab in Washington for analysis. It came back as being inconclusive as to if it was Rachel's writing or not. This likely means if it wasn't her, it was someone who knew how she wrote. By the end of December, the girls had been missing for 9 days. The families were positive that someone had taken them. The police were following leads, but they never went anywhere. The lead detective said, quote, "We just can't get any further than that parking lot. How can a trail vanish at its point of origin?" End quote. On December 31st, several pieces of women's underwear were found in a field 6 miles west of Justin, Texas, near a stream. It was a hunter who found them, and he said he knew for a fact that they weren't there on Christmas Day because he had been hunting in the same spot. The police brought in the parents and had them look at them, but they said they didn't belong to any of the girls. On January 1st, a man who knew Rachel called her father and said he saw all 3 girls at the mall on the 23rd, sometime before they disappeared. He claimed he was in the record department of a department store and had briefly talked to Rachel. He said there was another person who seemed to be with the 3 girls. There was never any other details released about this sighting in the media, so it must have been a dead end like all of the other leads. As time went on, the police and everyone else was starting to lean towards the parents' theory that the girls had been abducted. There's no way they would have gone this long without money, a car, and dragging around a 9-year-old who was definitely missing her family by this time. The police started thinking something more nefarious had happened, but they kept hitting dead ends. On January 3rd, the Fort Worth Telegram quoted a detective saying, "I wish we had just one clue to get us off that parking lot." By this point, they thought the letter was a red herring. They thought someone who knew Rachel wrote it, or if she had written it, she was forced to. Someone was trying to postpone an investigation or throw the police off track. Little did they know, the police never had a track to go down from the beginning. The police were frustrated and didn't know what to do next, which frustrated the family. A Houston businessman put the 3 families in touch with a psychic named Jay Joseph. At this point, they were desperate and would try anything to get answers. Judy Wilson, Renee's mom, claimed that Jay Joseph told them things about Renee that they wouldn't have expected him to know, such as that she had been wearing red and white tennis shoes that fateful day. He asked Tommy if the number 150 meant anything to him. He said that was the amount of bonds that had been missing from the car. On a side note, the information about the missing bonds had been printed in the newspaper. Jay Joseph said he felt that something was wrong with the letter that Tommy had received. He also said he could visualize the girls in an area where there was a lake and some horses. He believed they had been taken north towards Grapevine, Oklahoma, and that they were being held against their will by 3 to 5 people. J. Joseph gave the parents and Tommy a message. He said if they didn't hear from him again, then they would know that all three girls were dead. They never heard from J. Joseph again. After working with Joseph, Judy Wilson told the papers, quote, "I'm not ready to say I believe what he says, but after so many days, I'm not ready to disbelieve either," end quote. She also said, "I believe the girls are hurt and can't get home or that they are dead. I know she wouldn't stay this long unless she was forced." She was talking about her daughter, Renee. On January 8th, 1975, a friend of Richard Wilson's received a phone call around 6 p.m. from a girl who said she was a friend of Renee's. She said the three girls would be coming home that night on the 7:25 p.m. Greyhound bus from Houston. The three families rushed to the bus station to meet the bus. Finally, this nightmare was about to be over and they were going to see their girls again. They stood and waited anxiously for what seemed like an eternity until they finally saw the bus pull in. It pulled up and they waited impatiently as each passenger exited the bus, one by one, until the last person stepped off. The girls were nowhere in sight. A wave of disappointment hit the parents like a ton of bricks. They didn't want to leave the station. Maybe they got the bus wrong. Maybe they would be on the next bus. Most of them had given up by 8:30 p.m. and left to go home, feeling like they had been punched in the gut. Tommy and Richard Wilson, however, stayed for several more hours. They didn't want to leave just in case they were on the midnight bus. Rachel's mom had a feeling they were being watched and laughed at the whole time they were there, and Judy Wilson didn't believe that it was a friend of Renee's that called. The caller had given their name, and when they talked to Renee's friends, none of them had ever heard the name before. Judy even looked in the school yearbook and couldn't find her. When Renee's parents got home from the bus stop that night, what they found sent chills through their bones. Their house had been burglarized. Had they received a call about the girls being on the bus just to lure them out of the house so someone could rob them? Or was it the person or persons who had the girls and maybe they needed something that belonged to Renee? It had to be related. It was too much of a coincidence. By the end of January of 1975, the police had finally come to the agreement that the girls had not just run away. Missing persons flyers were put up all over Fort Worth. Everywhere you turned, you would see one hanging on a pole or in a shop window. On the morning of February 7th, 1975, Rayanne Mosley, Julie's mom, received a phone call around 11 a.m. She said hello, but heard nothing. She continued to say hello, hello, over and over. Normally, she would have hung up right away, but thinking it might have something to do with Julie, she wanted to find out who it was. Right before she was about to give up and hang up the phone, she heard something. First a moan, then a small voice says, "Mama." The little girl sounded drugged, but Rayanne swore on everything that it was Julie's voice. Rayanne asked the person if her name was Julie Mosley, and they replied yes. Rayanne then asked her where she was calling from, but the small voice said they didn't know. The girl said "Mama" again, then started to say something else, but the phone disconnected. To this day, Rayanne is positive that call was from Julie. In fact, this is what she told the Fort Worth Telegram. Quote, "I know there is a possibility that someone is putting me on, but I'm positive it was Julie on the phone. At least I know she is alive, and that helps. But where is she?" End quote. 2 days after Rayanne got that call, Renee's parents got a call. The police traced it to North Richmond Hills. It was a 14-year-old girl making prank calls. The police told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, quote, "She admitted making 3 calls to the Wilsons where she didn't say anything, and 1 to the Mosley family where she told Julie's older brother that she was Renee Wilson," end quote. Judy Wilson went to the police station to talk to the girl in person. She wanted to get her point across. Judy said in an article, quote, "She probably had no motive at all in doing it. When she made the calls, I don't think she knew the frustration she was causing us. But after Mr. Hungerford got done talking to her, I think she understood." I think a 14-year-old girl has a brain in her little head and knows that prank calling a family who is searching for their missing loved one is a horrible thing to do and shows that she has no compassion or empathy. She was not 4, she was 14. But that's just my opinion. 3 months had gone by, and there was still no sign of the girls or any movement in the case. Then suddenly, an elderly woman came forward and stated that she might have seen something. The woman revealed to 3 store clerks that she saw a girl being forced into a pickup truck on December 23, 1974, at Seminary South. She said there were 2 girls and a man inside the truck, and a second man was forcing a third girl inside. She described the truck as being yellow with lights on the top. The store clerks didn't know the woman's name. Fran went on record in the paper asking her to come forward, but she never did. One more dead end leading nowhere and crashing the family's hopes of getting answers. In the spring of 1975, the 3 families hired a private investigator named John Swaim. He owned a company called Special Services. The first thing John did was set up a press conference. He wanted to publicly call out the Fort Worth Police Department for being incompetent when it came to finding these missing girls. John was upset that the investigators would not let him see the contents of the case files on the girls. They explained that it was an open investigation, so they couldn't just give the files to anyone. If certain information in the files got out to the public, it could harm the case. John, on the other hand, said he believed the key to solving the case was in the case files. In fact, he believes the answers that they are looking for are in a recorded call to a police dispatcher from the night of the 23rd of December, 1974, the night the girls went missing. Here is what John Swaim had to say at that press conference. Quote, "We have received information that there is a license number and a description of a vehicle. This is why we are interested in these tapes. After pursuing this, our sources tell us these have since been destroyed." End quote. The chief of police responded to this allegation and said that they had no knowledge of such a call. Nothing had been destroyed like Swaim was leading people to believe. He made it sound like they were trying to hide something when in reality, the dispatcher's calls did get erased every 60 days so they could reuse the tape. In fact, the chief had just told Swaim all of this the night before, when it was just them. The chief told the Fort Worth Telegram, quote, "He wants everything we got. I don't see where we're obligated to turn over everything. We don't open our files up to anybody. It's against multiple laws. That's our policy." End quote. Besides that, it had only been 3 months since the girls went missing. It was way too early to be releasing files to anyone. However, they did decide to contact John Swaim that night and work out an agreement with him. The very next day, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram had printed that John Swaim was now praising the police, saying they had verbally briefed him on the files. That April in 1975, John Swaim said he received information from an unnamed source that the 3 girls had been killed and their bodies had been left beneath a bridge somewhere near Port Lavaca, which is 300 miles away from Fort Worth. The Port Lavaca police said that they received the same information in February and had already searched, but John wasn't taking their word for it. Swaim said they needed to search again because in February, the water under the bridge had been 2 to 3 feet deeper than it was in April. The searches began at 9 a.m., but by 3 p.m., after 6 hours of searching, John had called it off after finding nothing. For some reason, after the search, Swaim changed his tune and now believed the girls had run away. He got a few leads, made a big show out of it all. This guy definitely liked the drama. But when they led nowhere, he backed off for a while. In 1979, John Swaim died of a drug and alcohol overdose. It was ruled a suicide. Didn't see that one coming. Judy Wilson contacted his family about getting some pictures returned that he had of Renee. She was told that they had been destroyed. John's last request was for all his files to be burned. That included all the work he had done on the Fort Worth Trio missing persons case. 3 years of leads, pictures, and interviews were gone. Was there something in those files that he didn't want anyone to see? Why would he do all of that work just to have it destroyed when the family could have given it to someone else to continue the case? It makes no sense at all. The families felt like they were back at the beginning with no answers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Tommy, Rachel's husband, and go over his actions and a little background that you guys are going to find shocking. Tommy had divorced his first wife, which was Sean's mother, and 43 days later, he married Rachel. However, during those 43 days, he was also engaged to someone else. It just so happened to be Deborah, Rachel's sister. That is really weird, and it could have caused some issues between them. Tommy did wait a year and 4 months after Rachel went missing to file for divorce and stated it was due to abandonment. That was in April of 1976. In December of 1976, just 8 months later, he got remarried to another 17-year-old named Josephine Beck. He had to be around 24 years old at this time. This marriage only lasted about a year and a half. He divorced her in June of 1978, and less than 3 months later, he married a 23-year-old named Ruby Fox. He then divorced her for his current wife, and they have been together for over 40 years. Tommy was the kind of person who always had to be in a relationship. The case of the missing trio went cold just a few months after they had disappeared. Over the years, there were many sightings, bones found, leads here and there, but none of it ever led to anything. The investigation was still stuck in that Upper Sears parking lot. The case has an eerie similarity to the missing Springfield Three from Springfield, Missouri. They went missing 18 years after the Fort Worth Trio in 1992, never to be seen again. The house they went missing from also showed no signs of a struggle. I will eventually cover that case, but if you haven't heard of it, you can find a lot of information online. Out of all the family members, Terry Wilson seemed more of a mess than anyone else. Not only did he lose his little sister, but he also lost his girlfriend at the same time. Every December, the Fort Worth Telegram released a small article about the girls to keep them in the public eye. In 1994, in the Fort Worth Star, Rusty and Deborah expressed their anger at the Fort Worth police. They accused them of botching the case from the very beginning. Deborah said in a statement, quote, "We have a lot of anger and a lot of resentment toward the Fort Worth Police Department. They didn't run away, they vanished. We don't even care about prosecution. We want someone to contact these families so we can put some closure on it. That would be the best Christmas present of all," end quote. Rusty has spent his whole life being an advocate for his sister. He has a boat that he named after Rachel. He has used it to search many bodies of water. Finding out what happened has been his life's mission. He said he would continue to search for answers until he had no breath left in his body. He has looked into hundreds of theories and works leads every day. Rusty has even wrote a song about his sister. Here are some of the lyrics. "You weren't just my sister, you were my best friend. You taught me my first guitar chords with your guiding hands." In 1996, Rusty searched through the Yellow Pages, looking for another PI to help him find the truth. He came across Dan James. Dan James was a new private investigator who was just starting his career. He had lived close to the South Seminole Mall when the girls had gone missing, so he already knew about the case and had a personal interest in it. James agreed to help Rusty and refused any kind of payment. In fact, in 1999, James put in $25,000 of his own money towards the reward fund. According to Dan James, feathers started getting ruffled as soon as he and Rusty started digging in and going back and re-interviewing people that had been interviewed years ago, and then interviewing new people now. It was so bad that James started receiving calls warning him to leave the case alone and threatening his life. Someone didn't want something to get out, and James was the person who was going to do just that. So he was a threat. James was doing lots of interviews. He spoke to Rachel's close friends and people that knew her and were more like acquaintances. He spoke to everyone. He even spoke to two people who lived in a trailer behind the house that Rachel, Tommy, and Deborah had shared. People said there was an odd dynamic between Rachel, Tommy, and Deborah. James had received reports that leading up to Rachel's disappearance, the three had been fighting a lot. There was one report of an argument between them at the local bowling alley that had actually turned physical. Of course, Deborah says this argument never happened, but many people reported witnessing it. With Dan James poking around and getting people stirred up, rumors started flying. There were rumors that Tommy and Deborah were having an affair. There were also rumors that Rachel was having multiple affairs. Once Dan James uncovered all of this, Rusty started suspecting his own sister Deborah of having something to do with Rachel's disappearance. He went from working side by side with her to not speaking to her. Fran, the mother of Rusty, Rachel, and Deborah, didn't believe the rumors at all. She blamed Dan James for filling Rusty's head full of nonsense about his sister. But Rusty and Dan weren't the only parents that suspected Deborah and Tommy. A few of the other parents did as well. Richard Wilson was adamant in his theory that they were involved. He says until someone else comes forward and says they did it, he will always believe it was Deborah and Tommy. Those parents that believed Deborah was involved posted an open letter in the newspaper, asking her to cooperate with authorities. It read, quote, "Dear Deborah, we read your statement in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram on January 9th, 2000. You indicated you had nothing to hide. If your statement is true, we beg and plead with you to fully cooperate with the Fort Worth Police Department and the FBI. Please complete the polygraph testing and answer all questions. Deborah, please keep in mind you also have a sister missing. Respectively, Rayanne Mosley, Rusty Arnold, Judy Wilson, and Richard Wilson." In 2009, Deborah had posted in a web sleuth forum that she had taken multiple polygraphs, and she believed that her brother's confusion about her involvement in the case stemmed from years of drug and alcohol abuse. Something she had also mentioned in a letter to him in 1999. The police have never came out and said if she took the polygraphs. That whole letter has never been released to the media, but a reporter from the Fort Worth Weekly did see the letter and summarize it in an article that he wrote. Quote, "The letter criticizes Rusty's ability to move on, points to the pain his obsession has caused their mother, and speaks to the trauma her and Rachel endured at the hands of their father, reminding him of the bond the two sisters shared and the age difference between him and them." She cites an incident where she nearly dies of a drug overdose. What did you do? You sent detectives to the hospital because you were afraid I was going to die and believed I had some information about Rachel that I might want to confess in my dying breath. Perhaps most notable, though, are Deborah's direct challenges to aspects of Rusty's own memory, which clearly become a part of his own narrative, long before I met him. "Rachel didn't teach you how to play guitar. I did. She didn't even know how," Deborah wrote. "You have an uncontrollable need for things to be the way you need them to be, not the way that they are." End quote. It seems Rusty had created a false narrative around Rachel. He had only been 11 when she disappeared. Dan James may have supported the theory that Deborah had been involved in the girls' disappearance somehow, but he also supported her claims that Rusty had an oddball assessment of Rachel and her character. In Rusty's mind, Rachel was angelic. This contradicted some other things that Dan James found out while investigating. Rusty had put a lot of emphasis on Deborah's troubled childhood, but Dan James found out that Rachel and Renee were both caught up with the same bad crowd that Deborah ran with. Rachel definitely wasn't perfect, but Rusty had on his rose-colored glasses when it came to her. The one thing that has really bothered people involved in this case is the letter Tommy found in his mailbox. It was sent to the FBI 3 different times, and each time came back as inconclusive. They had stacks and stacks of things that Rachel had written to compare it to. The letter was either written by Rachel or someone who knew Rachel's writing. It is a known fact that siblings close in age could write alike. Rachel and Deborah were 2 years apart. Not only are they exposed to each other's writing, they have the same parents who teach them the same way, and the same teachers teaching them also. In a 2018 research article from the Journey of Forensic Sciences and Criminal Investigations, it is said that some writing traits can be inherited from one generation to the next among close genotype family members. It seems like the letter had to be written by Rachel or Deborah, but we may never know for sure. Another theory is that Rachel's father, Raymond Cotton Arnold, was somehow involved. Rachel and Deborah had been terrified of him because of his violent temper. Rusty, however, said he was not abused as much because he was the boy his father had always wanted. Rusty witnessed him being abusive to the girls. He said he remembered one time he had whooped Deborah so hard that she had blood running down her legs. He had also put a gun to Fran's head and threatened to kill her in front of all 3 children. During Dan James's investigation, he turned up some evidence that suggested that Cotton was having sexual relations with multiple young girls. Had he been sexually abusing his daughters or their friends? James said he has information proving that Rachel was 6 to 8 weeks pregnant when she went missing. The police have never confirmed or denied this allegation. In 2001, the case was reopened and assigned to a new detective, Tom Osher. In March 2001, he held a press conference to announce that the police had been combing through evidence since the previous January. He reached out to 70 witnesses that had been interviewed before and also 20 new witnesses. It was also revealed that they had collected DNA evidence in the case. Osher said that with the DNA evidence and new witnesses, he was hoping for a better outcome than before. They wouldn't reveal anything about the DNA that they had at all. They still weren't revealing any information after all these years. Is it because they botched the investigation from the beginning in 1974 and they don't want it revealed? If they have DNA, then why hasn't a profile been created? One of the witnesses, a security guard named Bill Hutchins, worked part-time at the Sears store back in 1974. Bill claims he saw 3 young girls with another young mall security guard inside his pickup truck. He said they were laughing and talking, that they didn't seem to be at all scared. He phoned in this tip, but was never contacted until 2001. The young guard was found and questioned. He denied ever seeing the girls that day. Being almost 30 years later, there was no way they could prove anything one way or the other. If you remember, the lady who was talking to the store clerks also mentioned a truck. Maybe, had they contacted the guard back in 1974, the lead would have took them somewhere. In 2001, the police said they believed the girls left with someone they knew and encountered foul play. Detective Tom Osher stated, quote, "We can say they were at one point seen with one individual, but we believe there was more than one involved. The case has so many possible suspects, but there hasn't been any new information and it's still an active and open case," end quote. Fort Worth police said they narrowed the person of interest down to 5 names. However, no one knows who they are. In 2017, Jeremy Rodden from the Cold Case Department became responsible for the case. He told Fort Worth Weekly, quote, "It's taken a lot of time to go through everything and piece all the information together. So many detectives have actually worked on the case. I don't have one roadmap. I have about 7. End quote. In 2018, the search for the girls in Benbrook Lake began. Rusty Arnold was following a lead on a person of interest. All he would say was that the person lived within 5 miles of the lake. He got rid of his vehicle around the time the girls went missing. Rusty thought maybe the vehicle had been disposed of in the lake, and there could be evidence inside the car connecting this person to the girls. By August 2018, Rusty had raised $10,000 to pay divers to pull out the 3 vehicles that they knew were in the lake, thanks to sonar. They thought these cars had been down there since the late 70s. In September 2018, the first car was pulled. It was a 1960 Corvair. There was nothing in it to tie it to Rachel or the other girls. A month later, in October, the second car was pulled up. It was a 1976 Lincoln Continental. Considering this car didn't exist yet when the girls went missing, it couldn't be connected. In 2019, they tried to bring up the third car, but it was so rusted from being in the lake for years, it started falling apart as it was being lifted. So they were unable to pull it out. It was just too dangerous. As of today, Rachel, Renee, and Julie are still missing. They are just a few of the many young women that went missing in the Fort Worth area in the 70s and 80s. Some say it was the work of a serial killer. We may never know. In the last 49 years, family members of the girls have passed away, not knowing what happened. They have had to live their lives with a piece of them missing. Some, like Rusty, dedicated their lives to finding out the truth. If you have information on the disappearance of Rachel, Renee Wilson, and Julie Mosley from the mall, please contact Fort Worth Police at 817-469-8477. That's all for now, guys. Check out The Victim's Voice on Facebook and come back next week for a new case. Until then, peace out.